But I think we have to separate the response to that into two buckets. One is the personal, private legacy, history, and sources of guilt and shame that she feels from her own growing up and her family. And I want to return to that in a minute. And then the other is the sources of guilt and shame that are in the social world that have to do with how women are identified, socialization, people's perceptions publicly of a woman that age. So there are different sources of guilt and shame that come from each arena. But let's just take the personal one first, because this is a little bit more difficult, I think, to explain, but it's fundamental to understanding the ways in which we inhibit sexual excitement. Is that all of us have some residue of guilt and shame from our growing up. It's almost part of the human condition. And it has to do with the fact that as children grow up, they're attached in their families for security, for actually for life and death, dependent on the authority of their family and in their ability to adapt to their family. And that is to fit into the rules of the road that your family lays down. And protecting those connections and attachments is of utmost importance developmentally. So, what does that mean? So, when you leave home, you're 18, you go to college. It means leaving the attachments that have been so vital to your whole psyche. And the idea that you might feel separation guilt is just hardwired into the situation. We all feel a little bit of that. Or if we do better than a loved one, we feel a little bit of survivor guilt. And that's almost part of the territory of being human. And then if you think about shame, we grow up in a herd that we depend on being able to fit in. And if the herd judges us to be wrong, inadequate, defective in any way, it is a profoundly harmful feeling that we have. That's shame, is how we appear in the eyes of the other. So we all have those feelings. And then what I have discovered is that, and they are often not conscious, but that what I found is they regularly interfere with and inhibit sexual excitement. And the one concept I want to make sure that I add to the mix that's important is I use a concept called ruthlessness. And I say, good sex, maximum sexual pleasure and excitement requires some element of ruthlessness. And people take umbrage at it because it sounds like I'm saying that aggression or hostility is a necessary part of arousal. And that's not what it means at all. In my psychological tradition, ruthlessness means to be without concern. It's what babies experience and toddlers vis-a-vis their mothers, which is they take from the mother and they don't take with a high regard or concern for the effect of their taking on the mother. That's what this guy in England, Donald Winnicott, called ruthlessness. So I say in sexual excitement and desire, there is an essential dimension of it that has to do with using the other as an object. Now, that's tricky territory, isn't it? Because objectification is harmful. We know that, and it's been critiqued up and down and should be. But somebody described to me, a woman said to me, look, when I climax sexually, I feel like it's a wave that builds and builds and builds and then crashes on the shore. And I don't want to have to worry about whether the shore can take it. So you want to be able to use, but use and not harm the other person. Now, good sex, it also, we know, depends on empathy and intuition, reading the other person's cues, being able to figure out what the other person needs. All that good stuff that we know in our culture is important. But this other element is also necessary for arousal. And if one, now here's the punchline, if one feels undue concern and care for the other, the object of your desire, then this ruthless part of your sexuality can't be expressed and experienced, and excitement is diminished. Same way, if you feel too ashamed and defective, inferior, that state of being is incompatible with maximum sexual arousal. So we see these affective states, the undue worry and guilt about hurting you, the shame-based sense of being inferior and helpless and rejected. Those states are both universal to some degree, unconscious, and always playing a little, throwing a little bit of shade on sexual exuberance. And we create sexual fantasies in order to mm, negate or counteract those affects. And what happens when you counteract them? You're able to express desire. So those are complicated things. Then you have to add one more thing just to make this incredibly complicated. Now you have the social judgments about, let's say, women in their 50s and 60s, postmenopausal women, are not supposed to be sexual. There's a phrase they call some women MILFs, MILF, which we don't have to say what that means. Some women have turned that into a badge of honor, but mostly it's disparaging. It's saying you're an older woman and geez, you stand out because you're someone I would like to have sex with, as if that's a rare thing and almost violates a code. So a woman has to deal with that burden also of socially being told, in effect, that A, they're not the 25-year-old Cosmo model in terms of beauty, desire, and allure. That's the shame part, right? Is there in all of us, but in women in this category. And then you're not supposed to want sex. You're not supposed to go out hunting for sex, for God's sakes. In fact, if you were telling your children and grandchildren about your masturbating last night and what you thought about, everyone would become psychotic and you'd be thrown into a mental hospital or something. Why? Not just because those levels of sexual detail are usually forbidden from conversation, but because you don't want to see your mother or your grandmother or your grand aunt reveal that she has those fantasies too.
Why are we like that? Why are there any cultures that don't that
Well,
seem to break that? I mean,
I
it's
don't know in terms of erotic desire, but certainly some of it has to do with incest prohibitions. I
mm,
know that sounds a little psychoanalytic wacky, but it's like you don't want to see your mother
mm,
as someone who's going around wanting to get laid all the time or have sex, or your grandmother, for God's sakes.
mm,
So there's this sort of familial prohibitions that have to do with that, I think, that have to play into it,
mhm,
as well as the entire social industry and capitalist machinery that has created certain standards of beauty and behavior that you see everywhere in every magazine, every TV and show and movie. And as a woman ages, she doesn't fit that bill.
mm,
She knows it. Source of what? Source of shame. Little bit. You can fight against it or whatever, but it is still cooking around in the background somewhere.